Victor, great to have you back on the show. I think, Simon, we're going to have to call him now. He's officially like part of the team.
He is. He's the U.S. guy, Victor M.
He's a Victor, the U.S. man.
Yeah.
We'll have to give him some other name. That's not good enough, but we'll figure something out. So welcome back.
Delighted to be here.
So first of all, I'm going to make reference to this great book because Simon and I have both read it, and I've also recommended it to a lot of our clientele and our listeners, The Great Canadian Takeover. Can you just give us a little synopsis of what it's about?
It's really all about how Canadians can invest in the U.S. Most of the books that were written prior to this book predated 2007. It's a completely different world out there. And there's an awful lot of pitfalls that many investors can make getting into the U.S. It's complex. The rules vary by state, and things that we take for granted in the Canadian market, which is a very orderly market by comparison, can be quite shocking. In Canada, my closings happen on time. I can book a restaurant, I can put the champagne on ice because I know the keys will be ready at 5.
And south of the border?
I would say 10% of my closings happen on time.
Oh, wow, 10%.
It's completely different.
You give great advice in here, and it's a very quick and efficient read.
And it covers a very important topic for me was, because we get the questions so often about, how does a Canadian own real estate in the U.S.?
I can't be in the position of offering legal advice or accounting advice, but I really am just sharing what it is that we do based on having acquired that advice and what we believe works.
Well, I think we'll let our listeners know, of course, that we are going to have a link to this book, so to your website, so that people, of course, can get their own copy.
Yes.
All right, we're going to make it easier for them. But certainly want to get back to where we left off when we last had you on studio. We kind of touched a little bit about stateside and what's happening with the U.S. Fed. So there's a lot of news about the Fed's pulling back on fiscal stimulus programs.
Correct.
How could the monetary policy of the U.S. Federal Reserve affect Canadians investing in the U.S., and could this negatively impact or affect Canadian investors?
Well, I'm seeing a couple of things that are changing in the lending market. I mean, first of all, in the U.S., Americans are very concerned about the pullback of this fiscal stimulus. They're concerned that it's going to affect the stock market, that with the Fed not pumping this money into the market, that all of a sudden there's going to be less money available.
Because they've been so used to it, right?
They've been very used to it. The reality is that the banks have been using this money in a way that was not originally intended. It was intended to inject liquidity, but today the banks don't have a liquidity issue. They've been going out buying treasury bills at 1.25% interest rate and getting the money at 0% from the government.
Wow.
So they're making maybe not the full spread that they would lending the money out, but it's much safer to buy treasury bills than to buy real estate.
Yeah.
So that's what they've been doing. Now, we are seeing that it's gotten much easier to borrow funds in the U.S. I can tell you from personal experience, we've closed 3 financings in the last couple of weeks, and it's much easier than it was even 6 months ago.
I'm hearing the Dire Straits song, Money for Nothing. I mean, it really was. And I mean, there's a lot more to it than that.
Right.
Correct.
But certainly liquidity is no longer an issue. And now inventory levels are dropping dramatically in all of the key markets.
Correct.
But I think it's also important to point out one other thing, and that's the Canadian dollar at par. Because, I mean, it used to be a burger cost me, I don't know, $20 when I went to Florida with the kids.
Right.
And now the dollars are apart. And I think that's got to be impacting the decision for many Canadians to buy south of the border.
It is absolutely a factor. And also the idea that potentially the U.S. dollar may appreciate again compared to the Canadian dollar. A lot of Canadians are saying, well, not only am I going to lock in now at a discount on the real estate, I'm also going to lock in at a discount on the Canadian dollar.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So they're speculative, right? They're
it's a little bit
feeling,
speculative. That's
absolutely.
correct.
But you know what? Can't blame them because I think it is inevitable. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The fundamentals suggest that the U.S. dollar should be stronger than the Canadian right now.
So, Victor, in Canada, prices are higher, of course, in what we call our major city centers, such as Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary.
Sure.
But investors are always looking for alternatives, and they sometimes go out of the city centers. So, for example, like Oshawa, even when we talk about Cambridge, Hamilton, there's a lot of things happening in Hamilton right now.
Correct.
And people are kind of saying, you know what, they're looking forward. They feel that area is kind of next and up and coming.
Yes.
What about stateside? Can you give our listeners some tips in terms of areas that you feel are great opportunities or particular investments?
Yeah, should we be looking at the secondary markets the way we're looking at them here, or stick to the primary markets?
Well, I think it really depends on what the strategy is. If when you're approaching any particular market, you've got to have a clear idea what it is that you're trying to do.
Okay.
If your goal is simply to find a bargain, markets like Tampa, Orlando, Miami, they're starting to get picked over. The inventories are way down. You could certainly go to a secondary market like Daytona Beach and still get great bargains. So the secondary markets, I think, are starting to become interesting, and I'm starting to see investors pay attention to them where they've been ignored really for the last 4 or 5 years.
And is that just because these primary markets, again, as you said, they're saturated, there's just not as much opportunity, so people are looking elsewhere, just like they are here at home?
That's exactly right. The primary markets, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of investors coming into those markets, they're driving prices up. In many cases, they're still well below the levels of what they were in 2006, so there's still some room to go. But the value investor who's looking for a true bargain where they want to buy something at 40 or 50 cents on the dollar can get some great value still in some of the secondary markets.
Okay, so I know you're not going to suggest Detroit, but
Correct.
certainly you must have a handful of places that you feel would be great finds if somebody's looking for that, great steal.
Absolutely. I mean, Canadians love Florida, so let's focus on Florida for the moment. I mentioned Daytona Beach. On the Gulf Coast, there are still some great communities. Dunedin. Dunedin's well known to Canadians because, of course, that's the training camp for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, and that's actually not far away from Sarasota, right?
It's close by. There's some great waterfront opportunities. Smaller communities like Dunedin, Palm Harbor, Safety Harbor, Clearwater, St. Petersburg. All these communities on the Gulf Coast are not as well known, but there's some great values there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out when we talk about buying real estate at 40 or 50 cents on the dollar, from an end user perspective, the original sale prices are no longer relevant. I look at, what's the replacement cost value, and we're seeing in these markets, we're still looking at prices that are below replacement cost. Now, from an investment standpoint, it's a completely different thing. We're looking at cap rates. So what's interesting is that in stronger markets like, let's say, Orlando or Miami, you're getting lower cap rates because although the prices are coming up, the rents are not coming up as aggressively.
As well, yeah.
So when you have a bargain in, let's say, Daytona Beach or other locations like that, the prices are still lower than they are in the stronger markets, but the rents are almost as strong. So the end result means the ROI is there. Is that sort of what we're seeing?
That's true. And my strategy as an investor, irrespective of what the market is doing, let's say, for example, in Chicago, the cap rate might be 8% in a given area. Mm-hmm. My goal is to buy the property at a discount, so I'm buying it at the equivalent of, let's say, a 12 or 13% cap rate, reposition it, get it performing well at higher rents and so on, and then now it gets refinanced at an 8% cap rate.
Okay, so Victor, let's go back to when you say reposition it. Just for our listeners, explain what you mean by that.
So I might be buying a C property in a B area. I want to renovate the building, I want to turn over the tenant base, I want to increase the rents, and turn that back into a B or B plus building that would be consistent with that area.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? It's being consistent with the area.
Correct.
Because the last thing you want to do is actually over-improve it.
Absolutely,
right?
You're just pouring money
down the drain.
And Victor, one last question. We know that you have a personal connection to the Trump organization, very exciting. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The Trumps are just wonderful people. I first got to know Mr. George Ross, who is Donald Trump's attorney and right-hand man. He's an extraordinary individual. The man's 85 years old and still goes into the office 4 days a week. And I'm so privileged. I have a monthly call with him where we talk about real estate and business. And he's just a wealth, such a treasure trove of wisdom. And so I just love speaking with him every month. And then, of course, Eric Trump. We've got to know each other a little bit. We've had dinner here in Toronto. Spent a few days together at the Trump Winery, and he's just a wonderful young man. For someone in his late 20s to be that mature, to be that business savvy. Of course, he had a good teacher.
Great mentor, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Or mentors, I think we should say plural.
Absolutely. But such a grounded individual. He's very genuine. He's not, he's not someone with a swollen head. He's very grounded.
Very humble.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for our listeners out there, I think we want to point out that, again, we're going to make sure that we have the Great Canadian Takeover, a link on our website. And Simon, I think also we'll make sure that link gets to your website, Victor. And that way people can also check out what you have to offer on your website as well. All right?
Absolutely. Thank you. And we'll post on your website and, of course, on our website as well, a complimentary white paper on how to raise capital.
That sounds wonderful. Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming back. And, of course, we know that you're going to come visit us soon.
My pleasure.
Yeah, great having you as always.
Thank you so much.